Good afternoon, Dad, or evening.
Patrick, how
It's
are you?
nighttime. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Good. I am Patrick Barnes. I'm an attorney in Lando Lakes, Florida. I work for Spinner Law Firm in Wesley Chapel, Florida. And alongside me is my father, Dr. Michael Barnes. He's the Chief Clinical Officer at the Foundry Treatment Center in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And
Mhm.
you are a PhD in marriage and family therapy, licensed in professional counseling. Is that right?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
All right. And this
All
is chat. We're calling this 2C, chat 2C, right? Because we've
right. See,
we've
yes.
broken up the organizational and operational trauma into three parts. We talked about operational in the first part, organizational in the second, and now we're going to kind of combine the two and then talk about what can be done about it.
Yep. I'm
So,
ready.
so let's talk a little bit about this, and we got a little bit of visual aids with us.
That's right.
Tell us about this slide.
So we've been saying in the last couple presentations how burnout or organizational stressors and secondary trauma that we're calling operational stressors have this very kind of intertwined process. And so we've been kind of talking about the infinity sign, so we wanted to show that. But there's one of two ways in my mind that we get this. I'll be as quick as I can. And the idea that for many people, the burnout, the stress, the exhaustion that comes with working in a stressful work environment, and that means working in an environment where people may not feel as empowered as they would like, and that there's just a lot of stress in the organization, that just takes so much energy that if they are working with really traumatized clients, that they don't have the energy that's needed. I call it ego energy, but the energy needed to be able to deal with the traumatic stories that they hear, seeing the video of the accident over and over, dealing with angry clients. And so that the more burned out we are, the more likely we are to experience a secondary trauma from working in the operation or in the operational side of working with traumatized clients. Other clients or other individuals are really traumatized by some huge event in their day-to-day practice that they can become burned out because it takes a lot of energy to go to work in an environment that reminds them of their kind of trauma response or trauma experience. So we wanted to kind of pull these together, that they are really intertwined.
Yeah.
The
So
more exhausted we
operational.
are,
Good.
the more exhausted we are, the more easily we're traumatized. The more traumatized we are, the more easily exhausted we are.
Right. And so when you kind of look at that from a legal standpoint, operational stress we talked about what is, the traumatizing events of the profession that are unavoidable, right? The talking with clients about traumatic events they've experienced, looking at traumatic or looking at, graphic photos, um, you know, having extremely emotional, or I guess contentious depositions or experiences in the courtroom, conversations with opposing counsel. All those are operational stress, meaning they're unavoidable. And organizational is the burnout and the inter office, um, stress that comes along with a stressful job, I guess would be the best way to put that, right? The dealings with managing partners and their associates and the stress that comes with that, or the associates and their paralegals, and back upwards, paralegals with their attorneys, paralegals trying to get burnout attorneys to do what they need to do, that kind of thing. And so what you're basically saying is the more burnout you are, the more susceptible you are to the secondary trauma of the traumatic material. And the more traumatized you are by the material, the more susceptible you are to be burnout and not able to cope with that, and therefore not able to get your job done. And so that's what we were talking about in the first two chats was these are not one, they are not separate from each other. They are individualized in the sense that they are different types of stress, but they're one and the same because they lead to each other. That
It's absolutely true. And the other piece of it is, there's a reason that we call it compassion fatigue, and that's because we have compassion for the pain and for the struggles of the people that we work with. And whether you're an attorney or whether you're a counselor, it's kind of the same process of, it's hard to watch people that, and you all work with clients for very long periods of time, and it's hard to see them struggle. It's hard to see them, the anxiety of going into a deposition and those kinds of things. So because we care, that weighs on us as well.
right, practicing with empathy.
Yes.
And without it, you don't necessarily have these, but that is definitely something required when you're in a helping profession, like being an attorney or a nurse or therapy, whatever that might be.
Right.
So I just find those two types of stress so fascinating, and I'm looking forward to kind of jumping now into, we know what they are, we know how to spot them, we know how they can affect you as an individual and in your firm or your public defender's office or your organization. And so what do we do about it? And I think we'll first start with, what do we do on an individual level for ourselves? And then what can the organization do for its employees? Because we talked about in the first chat how big the turnover rate is for law firms compared to other Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 100 companies. And it's massive. So organizations as a whole need to take time to fix this and to help their employees deal with this. Otherwise, they're looking at turnover, right?
Yeah, I mean, hospitals, mental health centers are pretty much ahead of the curve in this. We've recognized how much it costs us to replace every nurse who leaves the hospital or that leaves a treatment center like where I am. And I think the legal profession is really just kind of at the cusp of beginning to look at this, and the numbers are pretty astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about that how much, and the consulting expert that they had interviewed for that blog that we talked about basically said they're unacceptable levels of how much it costs to retrain a new person and to pay for their bar membership and their CLEs and all the training that goes in on an internal level, and then to not then address these issues that we're talking about and have that turnover. So,
well, and it really does go hand in hand. That idea of the more operational stress and the more organizational stress that someone experiences, one of the first things they think is, maybe I need to find a different place to work.
Well, let's get to the bottom of it then. What we're looking at this slide, healthy self-care activities. Walk us through some of these and kind of what your thoughts are as far as compassion fatigue and being able to combat those stresses of operation or organization that we see on a daily basis.
I think that there are circumstances where individuals can be traumatized to a point at which they have post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that, but that's not the rule. I don't see compassion fatigue as a disorder of any kind. I see it as a reaction that we have. And that the research would say that probably the most important thing we can do is the things that you can see on that list. And that is engage in self-care activities. And we talked, I think, in the second or the first of the videos about how often when we're exhausted, the things that we typically use to feel better require a lot of energy, like exercise and those kinds of things. And that the things that we generally use to feel good are the first things that go away. Mm-hmm. So to start going back to eating healthy, exercise, physical activity, massage, feeling better that way. Mm-hmm. Being intimate, working on our relationships, because that's one of the other things that we often see is that there's so much energy being used at work that by the time we get home, we just need quiet time. And that's often challenging in our intimate relationships. A lot of people who have high stress have sleep disturbances. And so the idea of really making sure that you do good sleep hygiene and that you get to sleep at a reasonable hour. And if you're not sleeping well, that you talk to someone about that. So those physical self-care activities are actually probably the most important.
Well, and I think it's interesting, and I think this probably applies for all of these activities, but if you know that you work in a profession that is going to bombard you with stress and trauma, you have to do these things to make yourself the strongest that you can be, right? And you have to say, I have to eat healthily, and I have to exercise, and I have to get enough sleep in order to even function at this job, because I know what it entails from a trauma level. And I can speak from experience, ebbing and flowing like everybody does. And, you go through periods where you're not exercising the way you'd like to, and then all of a sudden you are. The difference is night and day. And I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Everyone experiences that.
It's interesting. The one on that list that like go on vacation. So often when the office is so full of cases and everyone's really busy, that people feel this sense of I'm abandoning my coworkers, and they end up not taking vacation because there's always a big case on the horizon that needs your attention. But there's no hero award for being that guy that
not taking your vacation.
Right.
What about, so from a psychological standpoint, I think these are interesting, taking time to reflect. And that's kind of what we've been talking about all along, which is being informed, trauma informed. If you can reflect on your day and say, wow, that really stressed me out, and now that I think about it, that same scenario stresses me out every time I run into it. You can better prepare for it. You just say, I need to be better at blank, right? And that, whatever that is, that only comes with self-reflection. And that goes into, writing in a journal, getting therapy, and going and talking about where you feel like your weaknesses are. If you feel like you're in a firm or an organization of some sort where you don't feel like you have the ability to be vulnerable, right, and go to management and say, hey, I'm not good at whatever portion of, I'm not good at giving bad news to a client or something like that, right? And you feel like you can't do that, then therapy is the place to do it, right? Try to work with someone that's not in your organization on that.
The psychological self-care is really interesting because the more anxious we are, the more threat we're experiencing. I mean, that's what anxiety is a threat response. And the more threat we experience, the part of our brain that allows us to be relaxed, that allows us to be reflexive, to kind of think things through, that last one, to be curious and to kind of, still have a zest for life, is gone because we're in a survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, all we're thinking about is, how do I get through this? How do I get through this? And we find that people are less reflective and that they are less curious, the more anxiety they're holding. And so again, sometimes just talking to someone, a peer. One of the things we have at our treatment center is that if we notice someone that has typically been social and hangs out and has lunch with everyone, when we notice them beginning to pull away, that it's our responsibility to go to them and say, hey, we're worried about you. Because the person who has this response is generally so wrapped up in their own little world that they don't even know they have it.
And you said it, they're the last ones to know they have it.
And so like spiritual, again, a lot of people, in order to meditate and sit quietly, to pray, things like that people who are highly anxious tend to have all this sort of breakthrough, oh man, I forgot to do this, or, I should have called that client back and I forgot to do that. And so that's one of the things that a lot of the more spiritual aspects of life get overtaken by the day-to-day stuff that needs to get done.
How many meditation sessions do you think you've had where you've been interrupted by a thought that I need to do? Oh, that's got to go on the list. And your brain fighting with your body to say, we can't just sit here. What do you mean just sit here and be, and just be? I know that I've experienced that many times.
Me too. So many times. And it's like, hey, I got stuff to do. I can't just sit here.
Right. I gotta get up. And I think this is a bit of a tangent, and maybe it's repetitive, but if you're not meditating or you're not being reflective on yourself and how you can improve, improve your situation operationally, organizationally, and you aren't able to do that deep dive on yourself, and you just think that it's all external, this is exactly what you need to do then. This is where you need to focus, is on reflection, reflecting on yourself, because it's as much internal as it is these external sources, and that's what we're figuring out.
Yeah, and I don't know about the culture in law firms, since I'm not a lawyer, but anywhere that there's high stress and there's a lot of competition, there's often an acculturated view that some of what we're talking about is a sign of weakness or a sign of some kind of problem. When the research is, just look no further than the VA and all the work that they're doing on the Veterans Administration and all the work that they're doing on meditation, with remarkable results. So,
yeah, and I think all these other ones are kind of just expanding, and I think a lot of them are meditative. It's interesting that you list meditating, but then you say like gardening, music, hobbies, crafts. Those are all kind of meditative practices in themselves. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you call it: praying, meditating, gardening, walking, dancing. It's all self-reflection, and the point is to find your weaknesses and become informed of them. Because as soon as you find them and you find those spots where the trauma's coming through the worst and giving you the most stress, the more you start to come up with constructive ways to not avoid it. That's not a good word, but combat it, I guess. What's a good word for that?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what the word would be. I mean, I think the idea of mindfulness in and of itself is the ability to be in the present moment. And meditation the goal isn't to be Zen all the time. The goal is to be mindful. And so rather than avoiding, but the idea of acknowledging, this is how I feel, this is what's going on for me, and then see if you can let that go. So right. I think it's much more, the goal is to be aware more than anything. But we do want to avoid so much. I think about running, and I think running can be a meditation.
Absolutely.
Or it can be worrying about all the stuff you should be doing while you're running, which actually takes away all the benefits of running.
Then you got to run faster.
Well, and that's part of it. But like that idea of
get back to where you were going.
Yeah, how do we put this into practice in a way that serves us?
Yeah. Well, so I think these are all great, and it kind of covers it all: physical, spiritual, psychological, and it all really boils down to taking care of yourself, giving yourself the tools, strengthening yourself to go into battle in a traumatic environment, and say, I recognize that it's traumatic. It's not going to change because that's the profession I've chosen to go into. It's my passion. And I want me and my team around me to be as strong as possible. So I'm going to do my part by strengthening myself and making sure I'm ready to go. I want to, before we kind of close up shop, I want to bring this slide up that you made, because I think it's just such a good general explanation of the whole thing, right? From start to finish, literally from start to finish. The the helper's marathon, rules for surviving it. Know where the hills are. That would be being informed. Pace yourself. Don't burn out. I think you had mentioned in one of the other ones that working harder and longer is not a way to work yourself out of burnout. It's a way to make it worse and make you resentful because you're working harder for the same thing, right? And then stop at all age stations. So determining how serious is this, what I'm doing, what the material I'm dealing with, how many traumatic cases do I have right now? How much is on my plate? That's the first hill, right?
Well, if someone told you before you started a marathon that you could not have any water for this marathon, would it alter how you go about doing that? And you'd have to be really, really careful and self-sufficient to say, I can't go too fast. But if you have support along the way, then it really alters the experience. And I having run a couple of marathons, I realized that the more I dreaded hills, the worse the experience was. And the more I prepared for them, and I planned that these are the areas that are going to be the hardest, that I found that I got through it easier. And so it is being mindful.
It's a really good analogy, Dad. That if I told you were going to go run a marathon, but you weren't allowed to have water, how would you alter your attack at it? And so stopping at these aid stations, hypothetically speaking, good nutrition, exercise and rest, social support, supervision, those are all just really helpful in preparing you for the marathon that is working in a helping profession. So I just really like this slide. And obviously I'm assuming that if anyone that's watching has any interest in getting a copy of the slides, you're okay with that.
If anyone, I'm happy to share anything I have, assessments, entire PowerPoints, training, video stuff, so that if anyone finds this interesting, I'm very happy to share whatever. It doesn't help me sitting on my computer, so I'm more than happy to share it with whoever.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And I appreciate you letting us use it here tonight, because I think it was a lot of material that needed to kind of be seen as opposed to just us listing things, because it's good stuff. Dad, it's as always, it's a pleasure.